How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
Let's talk about this movie today. Let's act like people are walking in on our podcast discussion. So everybody laugh at 3, 2, 1.
Let's love being here with you guys.
Hello. And welcome to Cinema Shock. It's the podcast exploring the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. We do all the research so that you don't have to. We're the three guys telling you everything you need to know about your favorite movies and the people who made them, so that the next time you're caught up in a nerdy movie conversation, not only will you know what is going on, you might actually be the expert. I'm one of your hosts, Gary Horne.
I'm your other host, Justin Bishop.
And I'm writer-comedian Mr. Todd A. Davis. Thank you all for joining us for a very special roulette episode. Quick question. Do you guys like watermelons?
Only if they bite my ass.
Oh, okay. All right.
That's an interesting way to check the how ripe they are.
That's how you know.
That's how you know. So as Todd said, this is a roulette episode. If you are joining us for the first time, or this is the first time you've joined us for a roulette episode, what a roulette episode is usually in between these like longer form 5, 6, 7 episode series that we do. We pick another movie to cover kind of at random. We've got a running list on Letterboxd. You can find it on my Letterboxd at Justin_Bishop. And always, you can leave a comment there and suggest other things if you want to. A lot of times these movies are ones that don't fit into another series. Like they don't fit into the filmography of a director who we think we need to commit a whole series to, or they just don't thematically fit in with another series, but they're movies that are still very much worth talking about. So what we do is we just take that Letterboxd list and we just randomize it, shuffle it, because Letterboxd has a great shuffle feature. And then whatever movie comes out on top, that's what we pick. And for this week, we picked a really fun one. This is the kind of movie that when I kind of came up with the concept for Cinema Shock Roulette, this is the kind of movie I wanted to talk about. A movie that doesn't fit into any preconceived category, but it begs to be discussed. And now that you guys have seen that, I think you had seen this before, Gary, but Todd, this is the first time for you. And I think now that you've seen it, you understand why I feel like this is a movie that begs to be discussed. But more than anything, this is also the kind of movie that I like to discuss here because it's a movie that I love introducing people to. I love the idea that somebody is watching this movie for the first time ever because we're covering on this podcast, because this is the movie that, like, once you watch it, the first time you see this movie is something you'll never forget because it is so utterly unique.
Yeah.
So today, for the latest Cinema Shock Roulette entry, we will be discussing Nobuhiko Obayashi's 1977 experimental horror comedy, House.
House.
私あなたを救えなかった。
I see in your eyes where tomorrow is hiding.
I know you're scared of horror movie spoilers, but that's out of date. Step aside. These are karate movie spoilers.
What a strange spoiler warning.
Yeah. I feel like it's on par for this movie, though.
Sure, yeah. If you had done that and then just, like, I don't know, chopped your own dick off, right? As you said that, it would have been as surprising as many other things that happened during this movie.
Yeah.
So Nobuhiko, and I will do my goddamn best to say these names correctly during the course of this episode.
Yep.
I promise I am trying. Japanese is obviously not my first language or second language, but I am going to do my darndest to say these names the way that they're supposed to be said. And I apologize if I don't do well.
And we applaud your efforts, Justin.
A for effort is all I can ask for, you know?
Yeah.
You're still our resident cinema samurai. I don't know where I was going with that. It just sounded good. I like the alliteration.
I like it. Cinema samurai. I'm into it. That's what I'll start calling myself at the beginning of when we introduce ourselves at the beginning of the podcast.
I approve. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Nobuhiko Obayashi. He was born in January of 1938 in the city of Onomichi, Japan, which is in the Hiroshima prefecture. And his early childhood, as you can imagine, based on the year he was born, was spent against the backdrop of World War II. So writing about Obayashi for the website Senses of Cinema as part of his Great Directors series, the writer Hal Young explains, like many from his generation, he was too young to fully grasp the complexities of war, yet old enough to be able to remember its immense consequences. This context would go on to greatly inform much of his work, with his films often exploring innocence and growth amidst an approaching destructive force of some sort, one that is usually acknowledged but only ever vaguely understood by its characters. So Obayashi, he had this sort of natural inclination towards filmmaking when he was a kid. He created his own crudely animated, handmade films at the age of 6. That's when he made his first quote unquote film, but you know that he obviously had a desire to do it. I think it was a Popeye cartoon that he made.
Really?
I think he made his own Popeye cartoon using like cutouts from comic books and stuff.
Oh, wow.
So his father, who was a doctor, who, due to his own experiences working on the front lines during the war, was actually staunchly anti-war because he had just seen the atrocities of war, something that's going to greatly influence his son going forward as well. But his father recognized his son's talents and his inclination towards filmmaking, and he would go on to later gift him an 8mm film camera so that Obayashi could go ahead and start making actual films instead of this kind of crudely animated thing that he was doing before.
You see, parents, it's okay to be supportive.
That sounds incredibly personal. Todd's got some stuff to work through.
Sorry, guys.
Sorry, Dad. In 1958, while in college, Obayashi made his first short film, which is called The Girl in the Picture. The Girl in the Picture is a pretty straightforward melodrama. It's about a half an hour long. But Obayashi got more adventurous with his filmmaking after dropping out of college when he directed several other short films, including one called Dandanko, one called Mokuyubi, aka Thursday, and Katami, otherwise known as Remembrance. Those were all released between 1960 and 1962. It was during this time that he also directed a travelogue of the Japanese countryside called Nakasendo. Nakasendo is an area in Japan, or a town in Japan. The 16-minute short film's lack of narrative, because it was just a travelogue, it really gave Obayashi free rein to experiment with his editing techniques, foreshadowing his more radical work to come. Then in 1963, he would make the jump from 8mm to 16mm filmmaking with a film called Tabeta Hito, aka An Eater, which is this surreal short about cannibalism. I watched this. It's on YouTube. I will put links to any of these that are available, probably on our social media platforms or in the show notes and things like that. Maybe we'll just upload them to our own YouTube channel because they're out there. The quality that I found them on YouTube is not the greatest, but they're, if you want to see some of his short films, quite a few of them are out there if you know where to look. So An Eater is this kind of surreal short. It's set in like a restaurant. It's about cannibalism. It's kind of grotesque, and especially for the time period that it was made in the early 1960s. But this was the first of his films to really get Obayashi recognized on a bigger scale, earning him the jury award at the Belgium International Film Festival that year. But he would outdo himself 3 years later with 1966's Emotion, which is this bizarre short. It's about 40 minutes long, I think, about a girl who arrives in a big city from a fishing village. And one writer that I was reading described this as a caffeinated take on avant-garde cinema. It's seemingly at random. The film jumps between different media, including photographs, stop motion animation, painting, alternates between color and black and white. It alternates between slow motion and sped up motion. It's really all over the place. Very, very wild. And coming from the guy who made House, it's not surprising if you see it after you see House.
Yeah. Obayashi talks a little bit about the Japanese film industry in some interviews, that basically in the 60s, saying that they had kind of stagnated, although that's my words. That's not I don't think the exact way he described it, but basically that they weren't going out of their way to do anything special, anything experimental, anything shocking. And it was kind of all the same old stuff as far as filmmaking went. So I think he says like the early 1950s, that was kind of the peak. And then it all kind of was on a steady decline after that. So most of the artistic kids, if you wanted to do something fun, you get into making these short films. And so that's when he started doing those. And it was to let you do as much as you could in like a short amount of time. So you get to blow all your budget in like 2 minutes, basically, he said. But then also this helped you get on these film festivals and stuff too, because you don't take up as much time and you can show off your stuff and get noticed. And anyway, turns out he was really good at it.
Yeah, I mean, there were these like art centers where artists would show these like short films. They would essentially have like little mini film festivals. Even though they weren't movie theaters, they were treated more like art shows, kind of. He was part of this avant-garde kind of filmmaking, I guess you'd call it collective of sorts, of like-minded artists. And another well-known member of that same collective was Yoko Ono.
Nice.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, she was making stuff around the same time.
I saw in one maybe a little behind the scenes interview or something like that. I actually watched more than just the movie this week.
Todd did some homework.
I did a little bit of homework, yeah. But I saw that it was interesting to me that he described the decline or the stagnation, however you want to classify it, of Japanese cinema was largely due to a big boom in television.
Yeah,
which was interesting to me because we've covered a lot of people. I think of Sam Raimi just because this movie is bonkers, like some of Sam Raimi's Spookablast stuff. Not on the same level. It's anyway,
yeah.
But when you hear about somebody like Sam Raimi, who was very much influenced by older films that he was seeing on television. And then to see like television actually took away from Japanese cinema over there. Well, I thought that was really interesting.
Well, I mean, television it hurt the American film industry as well. There's a reason that at a certain time in like the 50s and 60s, you saw a transition from films that were shot in 133, the Academy ratio, or 133:1 ratio, which is roughly the size of a television screen, to going to widescreen. Because they wanted you to be able to see something bigger, of bigger scope than what you could see at home, a way to get people out of their house and away from the TV and back into movie theater. So they introduced CinemaScope. So like, and there have been multiple movements like that, even in American cinema over the years. 3D movies in the 1950s were the same thing, a gimmick to get people out of the house and see movies again.
Interesting.
So emotion became a big underground success, and it helped to establish Obayashi as one of the leading members of Japan's avant-garde film movement. And then he did something kind of unexpected, at least to his colleagues. He sold out. So employees at a company called Dentsu, which is one of Japan's largest advertising companies, they saw a screening of Emotion at a film festival, and they recruited Obayashi to direct commercials for them. So Dentsu had long been seeking out avant-garde filmmakers in Japan because, these guys are making essentially 1 or 2 minute little short films, the length of a commercial. So they figure these are the guys that we should recruit for our commercials. But most of Obayashi's contemporaries turned them down because they saw commercials as being ideologically opposite to the kind of more personal films that they wanted to make. So most of them turned them down. But Obayashi, he was not able to really resist the attraction of getting bigger budgets because film budgets were pretty tight for him at the time, and more professional equipment, even if it was in the service of, like selling toothpaste and stuff.
Right. I mean, I think that's important to kind of instill that in young filmmakers and young artists, really, of like being able to say yes to the jobs that will get you to the projects that you want to do.
Yeah.
And, letting that fund those more personal projects.
So like Justin was saying, the short films are commercials are short films basically. And but yeah, everybody else saw it as selling out, but he kind of saw it like when he talks about it, that he could still make art, that it wouldn't stop him from making art, and he would have all this stuff, like you mentioned, the budget and the equipment and stuff like that. So he would just find another medium to make his art. Although if you listen to him, he's also just like really weird and super stoked about the idea of, I don't know, he was talking about now I could shoot the big, beautiful blue sky. And I just thought that would be inspiring. It may not mean anything, but I could shoot the sky. I guess there was that.
So this gamble ended up paying off, though, both for Dentsu and for Obayashi. His commercials were immensely popular in Japan, and as a filmmaker, working in commercials allowed him, it kind of helped him to perfect both his signature style and his efficiency, because he was shooting sometimes like a commercial a day. So he would spend about the next decade working almost exclusively in commercials, producing more than 2,000 of them during this time period. Yeah, it's pretty wild. And you can find some of these on YouTube as well. And he worked with big Hollywood stars on some of these. It was not uncommon, especially at the time, for Hollywood stars to, they didn't want to water down their image necessarily in America by doing commercials, but they'll go to Japan and make commercials. Because it's an extra payday. This is what, like, if you've seen Lost in Translation with Bill Murray shooting the whiskey ad, it's the same thing, So, like, he worked with, like Charlton Heston. He did a whole series of commercials for a cologne called Mandem that starred Charles Bronson. And they're super weird and super fun. There's a few of those out there on YouTube. And, but, so he's working with, like, big Hollywood names as well at the time. But within just a few years, he would be making his debut feature film, and doing so working for Japan's biggest movie studio. So Toho Studios, we've talked about them on the podcast here in the past. That began, Toho Studios, if you know that name, you probably know it because of its most famous creation, Godzilla. Toho has done hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of movies, but they'll always be associated with Godzilla, which began its life on film in 1954, and as we know, was a major success for the studio. But by the mid-1970s, as we've kind of already hinted at, the Japanese film industry was in a really weird place. Okay, so Toho, you see, they had witnessed the success of Jaws in America in 1974, and they had seen how successful it had been with Japanese audiences when it was released there a year later. And what was happening is that Hollywood imports were starting to edge out homegrown Japanese films. By 1975, non-Japanese films accounted for more than 55% of the yearly box office. So more than half of the money coming into the box office was coming in from movies, mostly from Hollywood, but from outside of Japan. And Toho wanted to produce something that could be a comparable hit in Japan. They wanted a locally produced summer movie filled with enough thrills to knock the Hollywood imports out of those top spots at the box office.
So the Japanese film industry was tired of all the edging.
I don't know what you're saying there, Todd.
Okay. And hold for edit.
Well, Todd, that's a young person's game.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
I think that term is the new Bleak album has a song called Edging in it.
Does it? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just trying to figure out what the context was and where that fit into the context of what we were talking about.
Oh yeah, so you get what edging is. I don't know.
I know what edging is. Yeah, I'm not that fucking old. Come on, guys.
I also don't know why Todd said.
I was just trying to figure out how the joke fit into the context of what we were talking about.
You were talking about the Hollywood imports were edging out the Japanese films.
Okay.
That's
a bit of a
and
reach.
now that I've explained it, it's really funny.
Well, we have a blooper for the end of the credits, at least.
There it is. You're welcome, Internet.
So as we said before, the popularity of television had nearly killed the entire Japanese film industry. So in an act of desperation, really, major Japanese studios, with the studio Nikatsu kind of leading the way, began producing what they called pink films, which is a genre of softcore, adults-only exploitation movies. They were filled with sex and violence, essentially. They were softcore movies that also had a lot of violence, and they were, they became a huge genre. If you want to hear actually a little bit more about those, we talked about them a little bit way back on our 6 Degrees of Kill Bill series when we covered Lady Snowblood, which was produced by Nikatsu. So you get a little bit more of the history there, but these films proved to be very popular with audiences, maybe more so than the studios had bargained for, and soon the industry was practically taken over by them, leaving little room for summer blockbusters, at least summer blockbusters produced at home in Japan. So when Toho approached Obayashi about helping them concoct a script, they were hoping for a surefire crossover hit, telling the director that they were tired of losing money on, quote, comprehensible films, and asked him to produce a script that was, in their words, completely incomprehensible.
Nailed it.
Hey, he understood the assignment.
He definitely understood the assignment. Yeah.
So, to find inspiration for his script, Obayashi discussed story ideas with his 11-year-old daughter, Shigumi, later saying that he consulted with her because adults only think about things that they understand. Everything stays on that boring human level, but that children can come up with things that can't be explained.
There's two options when you're looking for this kind of thing. You can either go to the little girl or you could go to your drunk Uncle Charlie. And he chose the former, but I was really hoping for a sequel co-written by the uncle.
Uncle
He said
Charlie.
he basically good old Charlie. You know, he would have come up with something grand. He said he basically went up to her and he was like, hey, what if Dad was asked to make an entertaining Japanese film? What would it be like? And he said she looked right at him and said, don't bother. Japanese films aren't entertaining.
Yeah, she said, I think she said Japanese movies are boring.
And he said, listen here, you little shit. No, he said he was like, okay, but like Jaws, I guess he let her watch Jaws. I don't know. But he said, what do you think would make something exciting like that movie? Her wheels started spinning, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And several of Shigumi's ideas were used in the films. Including there's this image of a mirror's reflection attacking the viewer. That was something that she kind of thought of, like, she was standing in front of the mirror one day and thought, what if my reflection like jumps out at me? Which is something that really only a kid would think of. Or a watermelon being pulled from a well only to appear as a human head. That was one of her ideas. Oof. And then she also incorporated some of her own irrational childhood fears, including the idea of getting her fingers cut off by a piano, because I think she was taking piano lessons at the time, which of course is played out in one of, in my opinion, one of the film's more memorable scenes.
Literally, he says that like after this, she just started spouting off things randomly. Like they're there one night, she's brushing her hair and looks at him and says, what if my reflection came alive and attacked me?
Yeah, right. And he's just like taking notes.
Yeah. Later, she's talking about staying out at, I think it was like their grandma's or something in the country, and they'd sleep on futons. And you had to hang them up when you're done so shit doesn't get on them. And they'd be really heavy, and she'd lose her balance a lot of the time trying to carry them and hang them up. She'd imagine them crushing her. And also out at that house, they didn't have a fridge. So the only way to chill the watermelon was to put it in the well. And she was telling her dad about how one time Grandma was pulling up the watermelon and it looked like a head. And I thought it was going to bite me. And she talked about her piano teacher would like slap her hands and make her have the right keys on the right fingers on the right keys. And one time her finger got pitched in between the keys and she was like, it's like the piano attacked me. Anyway, at this point, I'd be like, kid, I'm going to take you to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
But Obayashi, no, he's like, brilliant.
Hey, but it works. And the thing is, I don't know if you guys noticed this in the opening credits, but Shigumi has a story credit on this.
Oh,
so he actually, she actually is the not the screenwriting credit, but the story by credit is to Obayashi and his daughter. So she gets a full screen credit on there because
That's
of
awesome.
This. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So after he gathered all of these ideas, Obayashi took them to a screenwriter named Chiho Kasura and had him incorporate these into the narrative. I tried to find out more about Kasura, but I couldn't find a whole lot of biographical info about him. But looking at his filmography prior to House, it seems like most of his screenplays had been for the type of pink films that we were just talking about. His early filmography includes titles with, I assume these are awkwardly translated to English titles, like one called Overly Right Breast, Married Women. I don't know, and that's like Overly Right Breast, Married Women. I don't know if that was part of a larger Overly Right Breast cinematic universe. And there was like Overly Right Breast,
what you have to do,
women.
what you have to do is you have to thump it. And if it makes a particular noise,
that's right.
That's how you know it's ready to go. Yeah.
There other ones were Legend of the Sex Thief in Edo, Sex Highway, Lusty Widow. There's also one called Lusty Wife, which I assume is also part of the same universe as Lusty Widow. I would think that Wife came after Widow, so maybe it's a prequel.
Well, Lusty, there's a well-known trilogy where in the third one, the Lusty Wife teams with married women to take on the Lusty Widow.
It's like the Avengers of softcore Japanese movies.
Yeah. They end up just scissoring.
There it is. That's all the time we have on Cinema Shock.
That some of the other ones that he wrote got right to the point with their titles, like one that's just called Sexual Assault in a Hotel. Didn't look up the premise of that one, but I think I can gather what it's about.
Listen,
that one was
never judge a pink film by its cover. You always want to get right
I
in
say
there.
know your audience.
Yeah,
Like,
right?
We've got a pretty niche demographic here we're working with. How do we let them know it's for them?
That last one, Sexual Assault in a Hotel, was actually released the same year as House. So this wasn't something that like he was doing early in his career, then transitioned. Like he continued to do this, and he actually continued to work primarily in this genre for most of his career. Although he did re-team with Obayashi for several other films throughout the years. They were like writing partners. So several other Obayashi movies after House were co-written by Katsura there. But even in between, he was still making softcore porn, basically.
Payday's got to be pretty decent. I mean,
yeah, they were popular films.
Yeah,
you got to get that bag. He was doing it through Peak Film. Obayashi's doing commercials. You know, that's how you do it.
Yep.
Got bills to pay.
The main thing with them is they were friends. Like apparently they were pretty tight, and like you said, writing partners. They were working on a movie well before this. Like they wanted to work on called Hanagatari or Tommy Hanagatami. We'll talk more about that, I'm sure. But
yeah, we'll talk about more about that later. But yeah, they were working on that before House, and that was supposed to be like Obayashi's big masterpiece. You know, like making because we talked about how the peak of Japanese cinema was kind of considered the early 50s, 1950s, like when Ozu and Kurosawa were, at the height of their powers. And that was kind of who I obviously idolized. Every Japanese filmmaker idolizes Akira Kurosawa. But the movie that you're referencing, Gary, was kind of like it was going to be his like war epic kind of thing like that. But obviously he didn't have the pull to get something like that made quite yet. So once the script for House was completed, it was presented to Toho, who greenlit it immediately. They read it and they're like, "This is money. Like this is it. People are gonna. This is the Japanese Jaws. If I ever read a script that was the Japanese Jaws, it's this one." But then they ran into a little roadblock. None of Toho's directors wanted to touch it, fearing that it would end their careers. They're like, "This is wacky, and there's no fucking way I'm putting my name on this." And Obayashi offered to direct it himself, but Toho turned him down because he wasn't on their staff. Because you see, typically, if you were a director for Toho, and this is the case with most Japanese studios of the time, you actually had to work your way up the ladder, often spending years working as an assistant director for, working for a more well-established director before you were given the chance to helm a film of your own.
I don't even think he expected it to really work, because he talks about even the name House, like calling it House was taboo during the time because Japanese films were not named with foreign titles. So he says he thinks he was the first to ever do that.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
And, but he wasn't expecting it would really get made either way. But he said when he took it in, that it was greenlit within 3 hours. But then he was just like, "Cool, so we're underway." And they were like, "Not quite." They gotta find somebody that actually will do this movie now.
Right. Yeah. It would actually be 2 years from the time of the script's completion to when filming actually began. But Obayashi kept busy during that time. He continued to work on commercials, and he started reaching out to other creatives that he knew to try to think of alternate ways to adapt House, whether it be as like a novel or a manga.
He was hustling the whole time. Like he made up business cards with the image you'll see on like not on the Criterion cover, but on another, like I think there's a Region B DVD that has it with the house and green and the tongues coming out,
the tongue coming out. Yeah.
He made like business cards with that were like really colorful. And I guess this is important to note. We'll talk more about this, but he never really looked at it like horror, like we think of horror. He did not grow up with horror, and he talks a little bit about that. That was not really a thing for them back then. He looked at it more as fantasy and that sort of thing, but this colorful image and everything was going against kind of what the movie was supposed to be. He made those business cards. He would hand them out and be like, "Coming soon from Toho." Then, like you said, the novel, the manga. He was building word of mouth. Like he was intentionally doing this,
like building a brand almost for this script that he wanted to get made. He also produced a radio dramatization of House, and that was a huge hit based on that radio drama. And I wish I could listen to it, but it's kind of hard to listen to a radio drama when you don't speak Japanese.
Yeah,
It makes it a little. You kind of lose a little something.
Can't hear the subtitles.
Right, exactly. But based on that radio drama's success, Toho made an exception to their usual rules, and they greenlit the film with Obayashi hired to direct and produce it, which was an unprecedented move in the Japanese studio system of the 70s. And I think that's somewhat indicative of just how desperate Japan's film industry was at the time.
Yeah, and this guy, back to Obayashi, he's a freak, man. I think he said during this whole time period of waiting, in between all of this, he made like 200 commercials.
Yeah.
And, but then while he's doing that, he's producing all of this stuff. There was besides the radio drama, there was like a fashion show based around it that they did. I think with some of the girls that are actually in the movie based.
Well, they were
on
models,
yeah. So. Yeah, and they made like posters and cards with the girls on them. There's like all kinds of different stuff. You watch this documentary on the Criterion, there's like random different styles. There's like swimsuit photos of the girls and like all this stuff, and it just says house. And it's like he's pushing all this stuff and building the anticipation and the pressure on these guys to make this movie. It almost feels like, I mean, in a sense, like it's like that 89 Batman push.
Right.
They've got all this merch.
But prior to the movie actually being made.
But prior to it actually existing. But people were like asking, they said like, where is this House movie? What is this House movie? I need
he's
to know
creating
more about
brand awareness. Like that's what he's doing here for this movie that he wants to have made, which is pretty genius, and it keeps him paid, I guess, during that 2 years. That
I never saw a connection, but I wonder if that has anything to do with his time in the commercial industry too. Like if he ever
maybe like just
some of the marketing got to him or something.
Stuff that he just learned. Yeah. During that 2-year interim, he also worked with a pop group named Godigo to create the film soundtrack, which was released long before the film was even completed. So not only were they doing all this other stuff, fashion shows, mangas, radio dramas, but they actually created a soundtrack for a film that did not exist yet, which is insane when you think about it. But obviously it worked in this case. And Japanese culture, Japanese pop culture is highly different from American. So I don't know how unusual all of this stuff that he's doing at the time was. I don't know if the other people were doing similar things or if this was wholly unique to him. I'm really not sure. But so he created a soundtrack to the film. He had originally hired a composer named Issei Kobayashi to score the film because they'd worked together on many of his TV commercials. But Kobayashi felt that the script needed younger musicians, so he suggested Godigo. And so Kobayashi wrote the score, but had the members of Godigo actually arrange the tunes. And as a side note, Kobayashi does actually appear in the film as the watermelon farmer, the guy with the big round head.
This guy was his buddy from the commercials, so he knew him pretty well, and they had worked on making a movie. He was actually, for that same movie that we talked about before, Hanagatami, I think he was originally going to be the guy who would score that movie for him. Yeah. But when he came in and heard saw the premise of the whole movie, he was kind of like, he was hoping to like write a more traditional score for a film, and apparently was not interested in doing one for this because I think Obayashi was looking for some wacky stuff.
You don't say.
So yeah. So supposedly, according to Obayashi in the interview on Criterion, like this guy had almost suggested Godigo to be. He was like, you need youth. You need somebody else to do this. I'll just act in your movie or something. And so that's how that came about. But then he also had the idea for like the piano part and that kind of thing. And he was just like, well, you could at least like write some of the more traditional pieces that are going to be in this, like some of that. Because he said he always pictured like fantasy and stuff with like having these like a really solid, I don't know, musical piece that would get stuck in your head or something. And so he got him to do that.
Yeah, so all the little piano pieces that you hear in the movie that's just him doing those.
I also want to say just really quickly, too, the idea of a soundtrack for a movie that doesn't exist. Slasher Film Festival Strategy, who does the intro music you hear for this podcast, that's like that brother's whole game.
Yeah.
It's like he just writes soundtracks for movies that don't exist, and you should check him out. Slasher Film Festival Strategy.
Yeah, if you go into our show notes on every episode, there's a link to their I think it's Bandcamp or SoundCloud. It's whichever one they're on. But yeah, where you can buy their music, and it's all really good. If you like the style of our intro, then go check that out because it's pretty fantastic stuff. So most of HAUSU's cast is composed of actors who were not very well known to Japanese audiences, but who had primarily only worked with Obayashi on his commercials and independent films. So during that 2-year time period when he was kind of waiting to start filming House, waiting for someone to allow him to film House. As we said, he continued working in commercials, and he started casting the 7 girls from models that he'd worked with during that time. As Gary mentioned, they were part of that fashion show, but so he had worked with these girls before, and that's kind of like where he pulled. So they weren't like movie stars. None of these girls really were. Of the main cast, the most experienced were Kimiko Ikegama and Yoko Minamita. Minamita was already a 25-year veteran of the industry. She had worked with Obayashi on commercials for a Japanese soft drink called Calpis, which I looked up, and it's very weird. It looks like milk. But it's not, I don't know what it is. It's not a carbonated soft drink.
What was it called again?
Not Calpis. I knew.
I was going to say it seems like it's on brand. This seems fine.
Calpis. When I wrote it down, I was like, the way that this is going to sound when an American pronounces it is that it's going to sound like cow piss. But it's
cow piss. It looks like milk.
Calpis. Calpis. So she was like in her early 40s when she was cast in the role of she plays Auntie, which is an elderly character, so she was reluctant to take the role at first because at the time she was primarily working in television and theater, and she was kind of worried that being cast as an old woman would have a negative impact on the types of roles that she would be offered down the line, but she did eventually accept the part.
This might sound like a random actress quirk thing, like you're like, okay, get over it, but it's really not. Like, I was looking into this, and in Japan at the time, once you played a certain age, you could not play younger than that.
You were stuck.
Yeah, you were stuck. Like, they just wouldn't allow it. It wasn't
just what you were. That's what you were known for. All of a sudden,
yeah. And so, like, once she had made the decision to go old, she was not going to be able to that was the risk she was taking, is that she was not going to get cast as somebody her old age or anything anymore.
Right.
Thought that was wild, but
it's really
so it was apparently a big deal for her to accept that.
Huh. And then Ikegami, who plays Gorgeous in the film, she came from a long lineage of famous kabuki actors, and she began acting herself in 1975, although most of her appearances prior to House were on various television series. If you look up her filmography, that's mostly what she was doing. Then for the other 6 girls, you've got Miki Jinbo as Kung Fu, Ai Matsubara as Prof, Kumiko Oba as Fantasy, Miko Sato as Mac, Masao Miyako as Sweet, and Ariko Tanaka as Melody. And then you've got Mr. Togo, who is the girl's teacher. He's a couple of them have a crush on. He drives around a little dune buggy. He's played by a popular Japanese singer named Kiyohiko Ozaki, who he really got the part because he was friends with Obayashi. The two had bonded over their shared love of horseback riding. I have been listening to Ozaki's music all week long, and it is fantastic.
Nice.
It is really good. He is a great singer, and I don't have a clue what he's saying in any of them, but I love it. It's really good.
Yeah, he was they definitely talked about him having this country western background, which I just thought was wild hearing.
Well, the stuff that I've been listening to his greatest hits album, which is really long. It's got 30 songs on it, but I wouldn't call it country western. It almost reminds me more of like the 60s, 70s, very operatic. I think of Lee Hazelwood when I listen to it, honestly. That's the American, and I love Lee Hazelwood. Which is a super cool thing for me to say, is that I love Lee Hazelwood. But that's the best thing I can compare it to. I don't know.
I don't know what edging is, and I love Lee Hazelwood.
But Ozaki was known for being a very handsome man, and he was known for these signature big sideburns that you see him in the movie, but that was kind of his signature look, was having these big old sideburns. But yeah, he was apparently a very popular singer at the time.
I don't think I saw one YouTube anything about this movie that didn't include a scene of brother falling down the stairs and getting his butt stuck in a bucket.
Yeah.
Twirling around.
It is an iconic moment in the movie.
Mid first viewing, Kat came back into the room. I rewound it. I was like, you have to see this.
Yeah, you missed a really good part. So a lot of the other small roles in the film were filled with other members of the crew and their friends and family. We had the composer playing the watermelon guy, but Shigumi Obayashi, Nobuhiko's daughter, she plays the little girl at the shoemaker shop, for example. And the film's production designer, Katsu Satsuya, plays the shoemaker himself. Todd, do we even bother with Star Trek? I mean, if you found somebody in this movie that is somehow connected to Star Trek, then you're getting a raise.
Damn it.
Granted, we don't get paid anything right now, so it's not going to be, so anything's going to be a
right.
So a 100% raise for you, Todd.
Yay. So unfortunately, there's nobody in Star Trek. But
I don't think anyone's going to be surprised by that.
No.
No. So House was filmed over the course of about 2 months on one of Toho's largest sets. And when they got to filming, Obayashi, he found that he was a little disappointed in the acting skills of his 7 main girls when he tried to direct them traditionally by giving them, verbal direction. So he started playing the film's soundtrack, which, remember, was already completed before the film was shot. And he said that playing the music on set completely changed the way the girls acted, and they kind of got into the spirit of the music.
He talks about them a little bit changing him almost too, like about the way you think of directing, like just that they're not traditional actors. So he said it was like very, it's like a play, it's how it was read. But then the music, they would kind of, just depending on the mood of the music, you would talk about playing like a song and then they'd be like happy and joking around, but then you switch it to a minor key and then he would notice they get kind of more in a lull and
more somber,
and weird. And so they would like have the live, like, or not live music, but music playing the whole time, like on set. And I thought that was really, really cool. It was also interesting that it was apparently a pretty big scandal. They were on a soundstage and on Toho's largest soundstage, no less, because he is not a salaried Toho employee. And apparently that was a big fat no-no.
Wow.
And so that was a whole thing. Yeah, but I mean, there's pictures and all kinds of stuff you can find of him just like playing around with the girls. And I don't mean in like a creepy, weird way. Like, I mean, he was just like going around, like skipping around with them and having a good time. And like looking like, I don't know, his daughter's there. He's like having like fun with a bunch of daughters or something. Yeah. And so it was cool. It looks like they had like a blast on the set.
And the soundstage, I mean, the sets are pretty incredible, honestly. Like everything has this real like artificiality to it. Even the outdoor scenes. I love the train ride scene, which just looks like a cartoon almost. It feels like something that you would see in a Wes Anderson movie now, like where it's like it is very purposely artificial looking, And I think it's just so unique to me.
Talking about using the music on set, it actually makes me think of Robert Rodriguez, who brings his guitar and between shots just kind of walks around putting out the vibe. And like I gotta imagine that's because those sets I imagine can be very stressful, especially if it's whatever kind of pressures. I mean, you think about these 7 girls who are really not actors, right? And they get this job. I gotta imagine it's stressful, having a director who kind of plays with you and plays music on set. And I gotta imagine that actually creates a pretty awesome working environment.
Well, a lot of Italian movies, especially of this time, 50s, 60s, 70s, and even into the 80s, would play music on set because remember, Italian movies were largely they were not recording dialogue on set. They were all dubbed later on, so directors like Dario Argento would play. He would get Goblin to score the movie before the movie was shot, just like they did here, and they would play the music on set to kind of set the mood for the actors, So it's an interesting way. I mean, obviously there are other technical issues you have to deal with, like having to go back and re-record all the dialogue and all that, which can create some difficulties in the actors' performances, I think, because you're not as in the moment. But when it works, and it works in a lot of those Argento movies as well, I think. So, like a lot of Japanese films around this time, House also features a handful of seemingly random nude scenes. Like it's just like all of a sudden you're watching this kind of fairy tale little movie, and all of a sudden this girl's clothes all completely disappear when she goes into like the water. Like, and you're like, wait, where did this come from? What movie am I watching now? But again, he knew his audience. Again, pink films were the big money makers of the day. And Kamiko Ikegami, who plays Gorgeous, she was nervous about her nude scene. So Yoko Minamita, who had never done a nude scene before, she decided that she would also take off all of her clothes kind of on set to make the younger actors feel more comfortable with it. She's like, look, I can do it. I've never done this before, so you can do it. I guess that was the thinking. But after he saw Minamita nude, Obayashi, I guess he was like, hey, she looks pretty good. And he decided to include a topless scene of her in the movie as well, which was not in the original script at all.
This is my kind of filmmaker. No. First things first, because I saw this in many nap needing people. These girls are not underage. They are all of age.
Yes, they are
there. Now, it does not help my argument that this dude's hanging out with his daughters, I guess, like when he's like making these nude scenes. But also, the Pink Film guy was the writer, so maybe they started there. Now, he 100% does say that, like, he was there when Minamita is telling her about, I won't even try to explain her thought process for it, but it was like getting into the spirit of the film and shedding everything and just embracing it or something. She's like this, and she takes off her clothes. And so then the other girl takes off her clothes. And then he said, he was looking at her, and he 100% says he was like, I was looking, I was like, you have really beautiful breasts. We must show those. So, you know, that's how that happened. But I mean, for what it's worth, apparently they were best friends all up the way up till her death. So,
wow. And Obayashi himself actually oversaw the film's special effects, and he did purposely make them look unrealistic. Like, that was an artistic choice. It wasn't a limitation of the technology of the time by any means. Like, he wanted them to look somewhat unrealistic, as if a child had created them. And I think that does add to the sort of dark fairy tale nature of the final product.
Yeah, this is the thing. I think some people are confused by that. The guy's getting exactly what he sought out to do. Like, he's putting his daughter's ideas on film is what he's trying to go for here. And so it's not necessarily like he's not making a slasher movie, you know. He's trying to have some fun with it. And they talk about there was a real spirit of adventure with the whole movie. Like, it was just like an experimentation and trying different things. And he would talk about stuff like shattering the mirror or whatever, and like trying to figure out how to make that all work, and the flames and stuff. Like, it just different special effects you see in there that they, at the time, they didn't, you know. He was saying we didn't have like a HD monitor sitting there or something that we could work with. We were kind of guessing at like how this is going to go. We don't know for sure how some of it's going to look until we're done. But that was kind of the fun part of it. It's like just seeing what happened. And
I think there were some,
it was even better.
Yeah, and I think there were some here and there where he was disappointed in the final effect, but I love it. I think all the animation looking like hand-drawn animation, I think adds a lot to the film. I think, like I said before, I think all of the kind of artificial backgrounds and things like that, like the skyscape in the background when they're waiting on the train. Like, I love all those little touches. I think it really adds to the film, and it does make it feel like a fairy tale, because it does separate it from our reality. Everything you're witnessing in this film exists in a completely different reality than the one that we live in.
He almost seems like he wants you to notice the special effects more.
Yeah.
So like you appreciate what's happening, or that you are aware of this, instead of like hiding it. How we talk about sometimes is he's like making it very obvious, and to him that's okay. Like,
yeah, he almost wants you to be like, as you're watching the movie, to be very aware that you are watching a movie and not witnessing reality. You know, like he wants the artifice is a big part of it. I mean, and he does weird stuff like that throughout. Like, even there's this really interesting moment when Gorgeous is introduced to her new soon-to-be stepmother, and where they're out on the balcony, and you've got this like really fake sunset in the background that looks like something out of Gone with the Wind or something, you know?
Right.
But he shoots that whole scene through these pane glass windows that kind of manipulates, it refracts the image of the people behind the window in a weird way, that he's like purposely creating some distance between the audience and them. It's a very strange choice, but it's also, there's something really inspired about it, because I watched that and I'm going, why is he doing this? Like, why is he shooting them through that? And it kind of like pulls you into the movie, trying to figure out what the hell he's trying to say by that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And a lot of it, I think, is just he wants to show, I think he almost seems like he's bored with cinema in Japan at the time.
Yeah,
and so
he's just wanted to do something different.
There was one video essay I watched on YouTube where think it was Noah Simon was the guy's name, but he writes this, or he talks about like compares this to Jean-Luc Godard because of the way that he sees the audience. Like there's the couple of moments like that. They're thinking he was influenced by Godard, I guess is how you say that. But anyway, but he said the difference between him and like the French at the time were like they were using to, they had like a big movement to show like it's all political. They focus on the political aspects of film and then how it can be used to manipulate people and that sort of thing. But where Obayashi's like trying to show the possibilities with film. He wants to show you like what could happen if we just opened ourselves up to it and just see all these different dimensions and different realities.
That's really cool. So HAUSU was released in Japan on July 30th, 1977. Despite their initial desire to have Obayashi create a film that would help reinvigorate the Japanese film industry, Toho, I guess when they saw the final product, they didn't have high hopes for the film when they released it. Because I guess they were like, man, we told you to make Jaws. And this is not Jaws. But they chose instead to release it as a B movie on a double feature with a movie called Pure Hearts in Mud. But the movie, despite receiving largely negative reviews from Japanese film critics of the time, became a commercial success and proved to be especially popular with younger audiences.
I meant to tell this before, but kind of in the filmmaking process, there was this time with even with the Toho crew, they said like working with them was a little different because they're used to their certain directors that they're going to work with, and nobody really took him seriously. And so nobody believed that he would make anything special. So even once the film was complete, like he thought there was a cool story he tells about like when they first start, and then he's trying to make himself have a relationship with these guys. And so he talks to the lighting people, and it's like, hey, he like learns all their names, and it's like, hey, so how are you today? Like, hey, you want to come over and help us cook this food later? Like, those lights are really bright tonight. Like, you can put them on this, just making like stupid jokes and stuff. Mm-hmm. He says that on the first day of shooting, they were walking around and a screw fell out of his sunglasses and he lost it. And so one of his lenses came out. And so he said he finished the rest of the day filming just with one lens in his sunglasses. Like he wore them like that. So after the first day of shooting, they go back to the back and they have like, he says they get drinks and stuff and hang out to celebrate the first day of shooting. They're all partying, but the crew's not there. He's like, well, I don't want to do this without him, but we got to start. So they start and they're hanging out and blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, like a little while later, the crew gets there and he's like, hey guys, I'm sorry. It was just late. We needed to get the party started, blah, blah, blah. And the lighting guy comes up to him and is like, is this yours? And holds up the little tiny screw. And he's like, yeah, that's mine. And he was just like, and he said the guy, and even he was getting emotional telling the story. He said the guy was like, that no director has ever even known my name, let alone address me directly. He's like, we all decided that we were going to stay out there and find this screw, even if it took the rest of the night. And so they found that for him. And he said, that's so great. He ended up making really great friends. And
so he treated them well.
Because he treated them well. And they also thought it was fun. There were stories about like, he would be like, what would Kurosawa do? Do it opposite of that. Anyway, all that to say, he said, even after the movie wrapped and finished, he still had his old script of the movie where everybody came through and wrote notes to him. And he said, this was really cool to me, but you'd think that they would be like, we got through it. We actually did this. The movie actually worked. He's like, but no, most of these notes are, and he was like reading them and they're like, this was cool. Maybe you should work on a memorable movie next time. Or
ouch. Savage.
Well, he said they were trying to be like hopeful,
right?
Truthful.
Yeah.
They're like, hey, this was a good job for a first movie. I hope that you
next time do better.
I hope that we can work together on something real next time.
That's funny. Oh man, that's funny.
Yeah, but he says that one of the PAs on the set too ended up sending a letter out to, I think he said it was a director that happened to be working in the US. And I know there were no official screenings, but he almost made it sound like either that guy had been showing it in some places or something, or had heard word from Toho elsewhere. But he said anyway, that he wrote to this guy, the PA did. It was like, yeah, we just finished working on this Obayashi movie. And, he's a great guy. It's not going to be much, but, hopefully he'll get to work with Toho some more or something like that. And he said that the PA showed him the letter he got back. It's like, well, I hate to tell you, but unfortunately, HAUSU has become a very large success.
Well, House was a success in Japan, despite the fact that Japanese film critics didn't like it. And as we'll discuss here in a few minutes, it has become very well regarded among critics, almost 50 years later, 45 years later. But as is always the case, I'm willing to bet that if you were to scour the internet for some reviews, you're going to find some people who maybe just don't quite get it.
Yeah, it's kind of wild when you look at the internet. You think the internet would just be in love with everything and they'd be supportive of all artistic endeavors. But no, it turns out somebody watched House. And now they need a nap. Here's a half star from Martin Stevens. It says, "What an absolute steaming turd of a movie this is. It's a bad acid trip performed by village idiots, and it was a complete waste of my fucking time. HAUSU is a messy and annoying Japanese ghost story. The silly screenplay is irritating, and the music score is awful. Hard to understand why some people consider this garbage cult. My vote is 1 for awful."
1 for awful. That's an odd rating system.
Kim gave it a half star and said, "Nothing could have prepared me for this." And that's just accurate.
That sounds like a positive review to me, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's not wrong, but
I think my literal letterbox says I'm still trying to wrap my mind around this, but the only thing I can say for certain is that you owe it to yourself to see this at least once in your lifetime.
Agreed. Now I just need to see it with a big audience, though,
Yeah, it would be fun for a crowd. As long as that crowd does not include D-Lo here, who says...
D-Lo Brown?
Yeah, I think it's D-Lo Brown.
Cool. I was wondering what he's been doing these days.
Well, his review title is titled, "It's Visual Torture." Man, this is the most annoying film I've ever seen. Everything in this film tortured your nerves. The story, the music, the design, the dialogue. It took me 2 days to get through this whole thing. Nothing makes sense here. 7 Japanese schoolgirls visit the aunt of one of them in the country. Strange, magical things start happening until it gets clear that the aunt, or the house, tries to feast on them. All this with 70s design, 70s music, and typical Asian overacting. I think that's racist. I don't know.
Come on, D-Lo. You better recognize.
This is the first time after more than 4,000 ratings that I give a rating of 1 star.
Wow. Ooh. Imagine taking 2 days to watch a movie that you don't even like. Imagine just wasting 2 days doing that.
Just giving it that extra time. That's 7, by the way, the 7 Japanese schoolgirls. That was apparently a thing, a tradition in Japan, and I was not aware of that. But
having
Obayashi,
7?
Yeah, it talks about like in 7 Samurai and stuff like that. Like when you crew up, you get 7 for some reason.
Like football.
Yeah. There you go. I don't watch
a lot of football.
Natalie gave it a half star and said, "Objectification of women in film. Why the hell is this movie so popular? There are plenty of great weird movies out there that don't use female nudity as shock factor. Are we just so numb to women being exploited and being naked for no added value in men's art that we don't care about this? 100% overrated film."
Did she confuse did this person confuse it with overly ripe breasts, married women?
I mean, there is nudity in this, but I would argue that there is some value in it. Personally.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to tell you, Natalie. I like boobies.
Yeah. Sorry.
But if they had been, I don't know, if they weren't the central characters of the film or something, I just don't think the argument holds up. But
yeah.
Hey, Jacob John Taylor, I hope that's his real name. Jacob John Taylor. This feels like a guy who's come to my door trying to tell me about the Church of Mormon. Says, "I do not know why people like this movie." Now, I'd like to point out that he says, "I do not know, N-O. I do not know why people like this
Okay,
movie."
now we know where his intelligence level is, so let's go on.
This is a horror movie that is not scary. So what is the point? I do not know. The storyline, I feel like this is going to be a poem. The storyline in this movie is awful. The acting is awful. The ending is awful. There is no reason for people to like this movie. It is poo-poo. 7.3 on IMDb is overrating it. I give it 1. because it is poo-poo. The actors have no talent. The writers have no talent. Do not see this poo-poo movie. I need more lines, and I am running out of things to say. Crappy movie, crappy movie, crappy movie. One of the worst horror movies of all time. There you go. It smells like poo-poo because it is what it is. Do not see it. Stay away from this movie. I heard it was a comedy, but it is not funny. It is just a stinky.
Was that written by a 9-year-old?
I think so.
I love
He
my
said
ball,
poo-poo.
my bouncy
He said-
ball.
Oh my God. Don't get me started on that. I will lose it.
He said poo-poo 4 times during that as a descriptor.
Yeah. And you might imagine he spelled it P-O-O, but it's P-O-O-H, P-O-O-H.
He
So
didn't
it's
even spell
Pooh Bear.
poo-poo right. Yeah, like a Pooh Bear. Oh, man.
Luke, half star. I don't know what I thought this would be, but this movie is butt. Gene gave it 1. It's boring the entire goddamn movie. I don't even want to give it 1 star, but Amazon made me give it at least 1 star. It's boring the entire goddamn movie. Even the cheesy gore and the horror stuff.
I truly do not, even if you didn't like this movie, I truly do not see how anyone could find this movie boring. Like, it's,
Yeah.
like this movie is, you
Far
never,
from boring.
Yeah, you never know what's going to happen. How could you be bored by that?
Yeah. I don't know. Ellis has 1 star. Join a cult, drink the Kool-Aid. Says, I watched the Prime streaming version, a better option versus buying. If you heard, you just must check it out. The trivia along the left of the streaming player was some of the most interesting part. Evidently, this film was commissioned as the first horror flick in Japan. Some studio exec blocked the commission to bank off of the success of U.S. horror flicks. So after the likes of Psycho, Rosemary's Baby, and The Burst, the Japanese get this first-of-a-kind language cultural barrier, maybe. The producers also did some pioneering spin-off marketing things prior to the release of the film, like creating a comic. Then, for some unknown reason, 30 years later, the film was released in the U.S. and becomes a cult hit. I only discovered it while hanging out with those pretentious movie geeks who appreciate stuff like this. Alas, another circle where I won't quite fit in. Oh, about the film. It sucks. I guess some may say in a fun way if you're into mood/reality altering pastimes. The story, plot, characters, they're all dumb. Some describe the special effects and action as cartoonish. There exists an absurdity of real people being trapped in a cartoon, but we're talking a whack cartoon and annoying people. Oh, and it has subtitles.
That's just another negative that it has subtitles.
Yeah.
The first Japanese horror movie is where I'm still stuck on that.
Yeah, he has some other history we didn't cover.
Yeah, I don't know what version, what reality he's living in, where Japan did not produce a horror film until 1977. Godzilla. I mean, if you want to call Godzilla a horror movie, but Onibaba. I watched one the other day. Oh fuck, it's crazy. It's called Jigoku. Have you heard of this one? It's on Criterion. It's set like in the majority of the movie is set in hell. And the way that this director, and I don't know the director's name off the top of my head, but the way that this director visualizes hell in this movie is unlike anything you've ever seen. It is just insane. It's wild.
Wow.
And that came out in like the early 60s, I think, like 1962, 63, somewhere around there.
Jeez.
So anyway, that's one of many examples of an earlier horror film than this one.
And finally, Quaker Bro, he says, unbelievable. Well, Obayashi, I have a huge problem with this movie. It's that you haven't made it for me sooner. Because if you had, then I would know how good you are at making movies that are bad. And when I say bad, I mean Michael Jackson bad. You know how he looked really, really bad at the end of his life? Because frankly, I'm jealous of you and your ability to not give a shit about what you make. This is not fit for human consumption. No, this should be watched by a higher life form with a more complex palate, but also an altruistic drive to save humanity from movies like this. Joking, not, you deserve to die so you don't have to endure a life in which you will never exceed what you have achieved here today. In conclusion, half star for the soundtrack.
That was a roller coaster.
Woo!
Was that a positive or negative review? I can't tell.
Yeah. It's a weird one. I like
Somebody
that
just-
one, though. I want more reviews from Quaker Bro.
Quaker Bro's very pleased with himself, I think, with that review.
I keep
Yeah.
picturing the guy from the Quaker Oats box, but with like
With like a popped collar.
a popped collar. Yeah.
When I say bad, I mean bad like Michael Jackson bad, but like how he looked bad when he was dying.
Okay, so one thing that is clear from those reviews, I think, is that either you are on board with this movie's deranged, delirious vibe, or you're not. You know, personally, I like that one guy who said it was boring. Like, I just don't understand that. I can't imagine watching a movie like this and being bored by it. I can't imagine watching a movie like this and not being like totally enamored by it, because it is just one thing after another that nobody could ever guess what's going to happen next in this movie.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Like, nobody. Todd, you told me this was your first time watching this, right?
Yeah.
Gary, you'd seen this before, correct?
I knew what to expect. I mean,
But you had not actually seen it before? You had never
I don't know
sat
that
down?
I've ever sat down to pay attention to watch it.
Okay. All right. So this is a first time watch for both of you guys.
I feel like you showed it to me one time, Justin, to be honest.
I feel like
with
I
you.
probably would have, because I like showing this movie to people. I've
Yeah.
never seen it.
Or like we watched it some night over at like an apartment or something, and like it was I don't know, but I knew to expect some Roger Rabbit shit. That's what I do going in. But no, it was wild. Like it's I don't know. I don't know what to expect. Like a lot of the time I'm like, what is this? This is just throwing shit at a wall. And then after a little while, though, I do feel like it started to grow on me. Like I got really into Kung Fu.
Yeah.
The character, not like I started training, but like it.
Well, she kind of becomes the hero, even though you think Gorgeous is going to be the main, like the final girl or whatever. But Gorgeous eats it pretty early on, and Kung Fu ends up kind of being your hero, which is one of the many unexpected things that the movie does.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I think expectations play a lot into it, like what you're expecting to see. Like if you go in and you're looking for, this may not be fair, but I think if you're going in looking for like a horror movie, you might be in the wrong mindset to see this for the first time, because it would blow your mind. Like I feel like I could watch this anytime now and have fun with it. Like I know what it is. All of it is insane enough that like I think my initial review was like 3.5, because I was just like, I still don't know what I think, but it's here it is. The more I actually learn about the movie and the guy who made it, the more I appreciate it. The more I'm like, okay, this is cool. And I see what he's going for. I understand the mission here. And I can appreciate that you're going for like this, the mind of a child kind of thing almost, you know, and it's like this alternate reality, just like how, I don't know, you can appreciate the fantasy of the whole thing versus like trying to expect like an actual haunted house movie or something.
Right, because this is, I mean, it gets lumped in as a horror movie, and I guess if you were going to put it in a genre, horror is the one that fits the most, but that's because it's a haunted house movie. But it's not trying to be scary, you know, like it's more, I think, a custom. I feel like this is more like a haunted house theme park ride than an actual haunted house. You know, this is like
a good way of putting it.
It's a spookablast, if you will.
Yeah.
You know, because I honestly think of this as more of a like fairy tale than a horror film, with the titular house being not unlike, let's say, the gingerbread house in Hansel and Gretel, or, you know, like the house out in the woods that you see in a lot of old fairy tales. And the 7 girls, all named after their defining tributes, kind of brings to mind Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. So I think this is very much like a fairy tale, like a Grimm's fairy tale, like a dark fairy tale, you know, more than a straight up horror film, you know. But I don't think that those expectations hurt your viewership on it, because again, like as the movie goes on, you don't really, you pretty much right from the get-go. Todd, me and you talked about this a little bit yesterday.
Yeah.
But right from the get-go, the movie establishes that you don't know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
Like right away, weird choices are being made from the very first scene where the girls are taking pictures of each other to where you immediately have to kind of throw all expectations out the window at that, like right from the get-go.
Yeah, I think first of all, my thoughts are going to echo Gary's in large part, but I think just to show, the risk of sounding weird about it, the power of this movie. I've made mention before that Kat, my wife, is kind of over our shit. Like she doesn't really watch the movies with me anymore. Unless it's kind of what, like, she watched Hairspray because she knew Hairspray and it had been a while. Same thing with Spider-Man, like she knew Spider-Man. But for this, she happened to catch like the first few minutes, and slowly it kind of drew her to the couch.
It hypnotized her.
Yeah. And it was just kind of like, okay. And then at one point, as I mentioned, she got up and walked away, and that's when what's his name got the bucket stuck on his butt. And that's when I was like, you've got to see this. And when I showed it to her, she was locked in for the rest of the movie. She's like, this is unbelievable, whatever this is. And I think I even made mention that she kind of became a film bro, where when the nude scenes popped up, she would just point at the screen and go, boobs.
Boobs.
I was like, thank you, honey. Yes. Gary, you mentioned about, the more we learn about this guy, the director, and, his perspective and like how he made these things and what all the imagery in this movie means and how it came about through the storytelling of this. It really it really opens you up to, oh, this is coming from a child, but it's also being told by someone who was a child and endured a very traumatic experience, the bombing of Hiroshima. And out of that came this sort of warped, beautiful, confusing experience that just this is kind of what is left after someone endures that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense, because it reminds one of the movies. Well, this might be a further viewing thing, but I was gonna say, like, it seems like a precursor to a lot of types of movies like a Guillermo del Toro would kind of make.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought
you're right.
Yeah.
And so when you think of a Pan's Labyrinth or something like
Pan's
that,
Labyrinth, Devil's Backbone, yeah,
and but yeah, it's just, I guess. My initial comment was more like, if somebody went up to you and was like, oh, you like Asian horror movies? You dig in Ringu and The Grudge? You should check out House.
Right.
And even after those, you'll be like, what? What did you just do to me?
Yeah.
But no, it keeps you enthralled. I mean, the movie is entertaining. There's no doubt about that. I don't think you can hate on the movie. And one thing this whole show does to me is makes me even more so hate being critical of people when you can tell that they put everything into something, and you're like, this, and you look at a guy like Obayashi and you're like, okay, he did exactly what he meant to do.
Yeah.
Now, whether you like it or not, that's another thing, but this guy succeeded. Like, he put his daughter's brain on screen, and he did it like in every way that you just mentioned. And so the movie's entertaining, and you, like Justin said, you can't tell what's going to happen from one scene to the next, and that's exciting. And it's just I mean, I don't get the boring thing at all.
I don't understand it. I mean, this is one of the most chaotic movies that you'll ever see. I don't know a better word to describe it than that. If you've never seen it, then at no point during its 88-minute runtime will you be able to guess what's going to happen next. Like the phrase, like where you hear where somebody say, like, he zigged when you thought he was going to zag, that feels like a phrase that was invented to describe this movie because it never does what you expect it to do. Like every 30 seconds, there's like this tonal whiplash between images of like comedy, like goofy stuff, like these girls just being teenage girls, and then a couple scenes later you've got severed limbs spurting geysers of blood. Like it's every 30 seconds something wacky happens where you're like, well, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of the movie's charm, because in creating this movie, Obayashi was willing to visualize the weirder parts of a child's imagination. In this case, is his daughter. And there's no rhyme or reason to a child's imagination. So why should there be any rhyme or reason to a film that is trying to recreate that or is inspired by that?
Right.
I mean,
a perfect example is Justin and I were at a wedding yesterday, and there was a kid walking around with a notebook.
Oh yeah.
taking a poll on who would win in a fight, a cupcake with teeth or a chicken wing with
big muscly arms.
With big muscly arms. And
I was on team chicken wing.
I went team cupcake. Yeah.
All right.
I figured the
I see where your
teeth.
loyalties. I know, but the fist could punch out the teeth.
That's true. But
the teeth could bite off the fists.
Yeah. See? But all that to say, like,
that came out of that kid's brain.
Yeah. That's
right.
What's
like
in
an
a
adult
kid's
wouldn't
brain.
think of that unless they were, on drugs.
Right.
So the thing about this movie, like, no artist works in a bubble, right? Every artist, including and maybe especially filmmakers, tend to be influenced by those that came before. But the thing with Nobuhiko Obayashi is that he's playing completely by his own set of rules here. But like Gary mentioned earlier, that he was kind of bored by Japanese cinema, so he broke every single rule that had ever been established. Nothing in House looks like any movie that had come before it. Or after it, for that matter. Nobody's really even tried to recreate what he does here. Like, I can't think of another movie outside of maybe some of his other ones. And, Obayashi has credited Jean-Luc Godard, and specifically Breathless, as his biggest influence. But I don't see a lot of that here, personally. And Breathless is a great movie, but it is the most French fucking movie you will ever see. Like, and nothing in House to me remotely resembles that film. So maybe some of his influence from that or on a different level than what you're seeing visually, I guess. I don't know. But I think his biggest influence is his own imagination. Like, he is only limited by he's not even limited by his own imagination, but by the imagination of a child, his daughter, and I think that's really cool. I can't think of another film that fully like encompasses a child's imagination the way that this one does, because most of the time it's an adult who is trying to just remember what it was like to be a kid. He actually talked to a kid and wrote down her ideas and visualized them on film. And I think that's really like incredibly unique.
Yeah.
And I think it's part of why they had issues with like the story of the film. The story doesn't matter in this film. The plot doesn't matter. I could explain the plot to this in about 30 seconds. But House isn't about the story that Obayashi is telling. It's about the way in which he chooses to tell it. It's about the medium more than the message. That's kind of what he's doing here.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that he doesn't have a message. I mean, Todd, I think you mentioned that you watched that. There's a really great video essay on the Criterion release of this.
Yes.
That discusses how this movie was influenced by the theme of the atomic bomb, because you've got the backstory with Auntie that's very obvious regarding World War II. And I think if I remember right in that essay, it's, if you have the Criterion channel, it's streaming on there as well, but it's on the Criterion Blu-ray as a special feature. But this guy who made this video essay, it's very short, maybe 5 minutes or so.
Yeah,
but
it's not long.
He gets to some really good points, how the girl's innocence in the first half of the film kind of represents life before the atomic bomb in Japan. And then there's this moment at like halfway through, like almost, I think he says it's at the exact halfway moment in the film where Gorgeous looks into a mirror and her reflection becomes Auntie.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a merging of two generations, the past and the present, and how everything after that is sort of post A-bomb, with the cat itself and specifically the flash of those eyes being the flash of the A-bomb, which they also reference during the film. So it's clear that Obayashi had a message here, but that's not necessarily like his number one priority. I mean, that's a message that anti-war message is something that is kind of a through line through his entire filmography. Because, as we said before, Obayashi's films are highly influenced by his childhood, where he lived through World War II in Japan, and he came of age in post-war Japan, which was an incredibly difficult place to grow up.
Yeah.
And House is no exception to that rule. I mean, like I said, Auntie's backstory is integral to the story that the film is telling. Her fiance died during the war, and then everything else that happens is a result of that tragedy and of Auntie's inability to let her life progress past that point, because she kind of stopped at that point.
Yeah.
She's really just been wasting her life in this house where her personal trauma is keeping her stagnant. So it's really a film about kind of wasted potential and wasted life. And her Auntie's trauma, I think, kind of becomes in a way like a disease that not only ruins her life, but it infects the house itself, and it ruins the life of her niece and her niece's friends, all because she couldn't move past this tragedy that happened in her life. So Obayashi has something to say here. I mean, you guys watched that documentary about the making of the film where he's telling the story of it. He's a highly intelligent man. Like, he knows exactly what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that he decides that the medium that he wants to use is not just film, but like experimental film. Like, he's throwing everything at the wall, but there is meaning to it. Now, whether you need to understand that meaning to enjoy the film, I don't think you do. I think the enjoyment of this film is just the roller coaster ride that is House, because it is a thrill ride, like beginning to end,
for sure.
Just the insanity.
Yeah,
I don't even think it ever packages it up neatly at the end. Like, it's kind of weird. Like, I guess I don't know. It makes me wonder if he has like a really dark side too that we're not seeing.
Yeah,
maybe from his. Well, because even the aunt is like having this like, what is it? The spirit is. She doesn't like them because they have no connection to the war or to the bombing.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. That's interesting that, like, I wonder if he's hanging out and having fun with all these young people, but like, is he also like kind of in the back of his mind has this like darkness about like, fuck all you. You don't know what it's like for all your friends to be dead.
This disdain
I've seen some shit
for the disdain of their privilege of having not lived through the war.
Yeah.
Right.
Something like that. Yeah. It makes me think of like Vietnam veterans and stuff like that who just couldn't cope and came home to a world that hated them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, even seeing them talking about the cat, like the cat is a prominent feature, but when they talk about the cat being the symbol of the bomb exploding itself, and looking like that puff of
mushroom
that
cloud,
puff the mushroom
looks
cloud.
like cotton candy.
It looks like cotton candy, which kind of shows you the mindset of these kids.
They don't understand the gravity of what happened.
Exactly. And that when you talk to folks who endured certain traumas like war and other things that cause PTSD, when people who don't understand that, it looks like cotton candy or something of the similar nature, it can be infuriating. And if for someone who hasn't let go or dealt with or healed properly from that trauma, it can be infuriating.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, you're talking about one of the worst atrocities that humans have ever dealt.
Yeah.
In the atomic bomb dropping on Hiroshima. Yeah. And they're just saying, looks like cotton candy.
It looks like cotton candy. Yeah.
So are you guys ready to get into further viewing? Do you have any further viewing entries? This is a tough one. This
Yes.
This is a tough one.
I didn't think I had one until just a minute ago. Where I mentioned like something like the Guillermo del Toro stuff. Like
I mean,
think
I get where you're coming with those, where it's using the backdrop of war to tell a dark fairy tale. Granted, much darker, I think, than what this does. But I think you're on a good track with those.
You want to go first, Gary, or you want me to go? Or
I think
that was it for me. Yeah.
Okay.
That was basically me going.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So just everything, Guillermo.
Let's say Pan's Labyrinth.
This is like what it sounds like when I'm having sex with my wife.
Yeah. No, I just did. I just went.
Yeah. I'm good. That was me. I was in and I went. And that's good.
Yeah. So Pan's Labyrinth and The Devil's Backbone are Gary's picks.
So I went a little bit different direction. Shocker.
Wow.
Yeah.
What?
Imagine that. So from
he picked Roger Rabbit.
From 2008, written by the director, who's known for music videos, starring two musicians, with the tagline, "You name it, we shoot it."
Is it Belly?
No.
Man, I love that movie. Fucking love Belly. Is it Be Kind Rewind?
Be Kind Rewind.
Yeah.
Directed by Michel Gondry. Yeah.
I rewatched that a couple weeks ago. It's fantastic.
Yeah. I recently caught it again, and talking about all the imagery of the mind of a child, I feel like Michel Gondry's really tapped into that, not only like within himself, but I feel like he brings that out of his actors. Of course,
I would agree with that.
The musicians I'm talking about are, Jack Black and Mos Def. But it's got a great cast, and it really kind of, in addition to seeing all of the types of filmmaking techniques that Michel Gondry uses, the film also shows you those techniques being used to make films.
Yeah.
And so it's a real kind of meta experience, but also one born from hardship that these characters are striving to save this small little video store. And it's not the bombing of Hiroshima, but like they're really, not quite, it's close, but but they're really, really trying to get this thing done amidst having nothing except their creativity. And they just pour it into these projects, these sweeted films, and you get this stuff that the community ends up rallying behind, kind of like House, where like the critics didn't dig it, but man, the public sure did. So so Be Kind Rewind. That's my choice.
It's a fun pick. Yeah. I had a really hard time with this one. And then when I was, other than, I like to do further viewing oftentimes with movies that I think are, if you enjoyed this, but you want to watch more of this director's stuff or another of the actor in this stuff, things like that. I like to use that. But unfortunately, a lot of that stuff is not available here. But then I read an article on the British Film Institute's website about this movie. And that article called this The Evil Dead meets Yellow Submarine. Yes. And then I cannot think of a better triple feature than Evil Dead, Yellow Submarine, and House. Like that's a hell of a night right there, right? So that's what I'm going with. Evil Dead and Yellow Submarine, but you have to watch them all. You have to watch all three of them for it to work.
I actually kept bringing up Evil Dead as Kat and I were watching it. I was like, I'm getting some major Evil Dead vibes here.
And you would think that Sam Raimi could be influenced by this, but there's no way he could have seen it.
Yeah.
Before Evil Dead.
Right.
What do you guys think Mr. Togo turns into bananas at the end of the movie?
Why?
Yeah. What's the symbolism there?
I was going to bring that up too. I have no idea.
I have no idea.
I don't know what happened in that scene.
Like, it just turns into a pile of bananas. I don't know.
It is kind of a bonkers move narratively.
And I couldn't find anybody. Like, why did nobody ask him that? Did he not explain Mr. Togo turning into bananas?
He had to have at some point.
It makes me think of like when the Guardians and the Guardians of the Galaxy are like sneaking up on Thanos, and he gets the drop on him, and like like Mantis unravels and Drax turns into a bunch of cubes and falls apart.
He just turned into bananas.
Yeah, and like Quill's gun like shoots bubbles and stuff. But yeah, like this guy, because they make a big deal about, oh, the man is coming to help us, and I was like, the guy who got a bucket stuck on his ass, you're waiting for that dude to save you, okay? But at the same time, like, apparently the spirit maybe felt threatened by it and was just like, I know, bananas, like, okay,
yeah,
I
why
guess.
Bananas? Why not? I don't know.
Stop the threat before it gets there. I don't know.
I just found a Reddit thread about the banana thing. I was just like searching, and somebody on Reddit said he hated melons and liked bananas. The guy turned into a skeleton, and Togo turned into a pile of bananas. Classic horror trope.
Sure. Okay.
That old chestnut.
I do love the scene of the skeleton dancing too. There's so many scenes in this. I just want to be like, I want to talk about specific scenes, but then we'll be here all day.
Right.
But I love the skeleton in the background.
In the background, just getting down.
Ty West has an interview on that Criterion as well. That's pretty cool. And just some notes from what he's talking about. He just talks about loving this movie, but and then they also had the clip of I found the clip of Bill Hader visiting the Criterion offices or something and going through movies, and he picks out House, and he's like, "Oh, this movie is fucking great." Like he's like, "This is just like whatever you think it is. It's not. Just you gotta watch this movie." And he like unzips his hoodie and he was like, "I didn't even plan on this, but this is what I got." And he has like the red shirt with the cat face on it.
Yeah.
Nice. And anyway, Ty West was talking about like how he's like, this is I think the most original film I've ever seen in my entire life.
Yeah, it's hard to argue against that.
Yeah,
because it is this one. I feel like this phrase really is true. Is that this is unlike any other movie that I've ever seen. Yeah. Like it truly is. Like there's nothing else you can compare it to. It is just wholly original and wholly unique, and it's just like it's why I like showing this movie to people, because there's no frame of reference. I don't care how many movies you've seen. I don't care how many thousands of movies you've seen. Not a single one of them is going to conjure up images of what you see in this movie. Like it's almost like it's its whole extra genre. He talks only this movie exists in.
He talks about how it is like the literal POV of a child, that he feels like it's just like manic, emotionally experimental, it's melodramatic, and it's just like he's just like how like a kid could be like enthralled by something, then immediately frightened by something, just and all around. And he's like, and I've never seen a movie that's used like, I think, every fucking camera trick ever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like just like all in one movie. Mm-hmm. Just like throw them all in here. He also talks about how it's crazy that like he was like, nowadays he's like, I don't know if you guys know this, but like horror, it's like they'll hire commercial directors all day long because they just need it to all look the same and smooth and just easy, and just like, this is what we expect, and this is this is what you get. It's milquetoast, just like plain Jane. Like this is the movie. So commercial directors are great for that. He was like, but then this Japanese time period, they chose the commercial director to make the fucking wildest shit you've ever seen in your entire life.
Yeah.
Like, what is this? He's just like, he said that he thinks that it's like, maybe it's the first art horror film ever. He said that like he knows his friends are like, that's like some stuff they try to achieve on their own things, but never like to this level. Like it just goes so crazy.
Yeah.
Well, House was not officially screened here in the U.S. until Janus Films bought the rights to the film in early 2010 and began screening it across the country. I think the very first screening was at the IFC Center in New York City. And then the Criterion Collection, who works very closely with Janus, released it on DVD and Blu-ray later that year. And that's really where the cult phenomenon of House began, because it had not really nobody in America had ever seen it before these screenings began. In the decade plus since it first screened in the U.S., though, House has become considered a bona fide cult classic. In Japan, however, House was just the beginning of Nobuhiko Obayashi's career. Remember, this is his first feature film, but throughout the 80s, he continued to make feature-length films and honed his filmmaking style to be a little bit more in tune with the mainstream audiences. He never really abandoned his avant-garde tendencies, but he directed a series of popular coming-of-age stories during that time, continued to work throughout the 90s and the 2000s, and then in 2016, Obayashi was diagnosed with stage 4 terminal cancer and only given a few months to live. But despite that diagnosis, he got to work on a film called Hanagatami, one we mentioned earlier, a passion project that had been conceived before House. So this is a movie that had been in the back of his mind for 40 years at this point. Jeez. And like many of his films, that movie was inspired by the director's own childhood, set to the backdrop of the Second World War. And it was released in 2017 to great critical acclaim, with critics praising its experimental and psychedelic visuals and editing, along with its strong anti-war message. Obayashi's final film was called The Labyrinth of Cinema, released in 2019. Another anti-war fantasy. It's a story about 3 present-day moviegoers who find themselves transported back to 1945, just before the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. Nobuhiko Obayashi died on April 10th, 2020, at the age of 82, died from lung cancer. And while, apart from House, his films are rarely seen outside of his native Japan, his playful, inventive, and personal work will always be there, waiting for new generations to discover it. I really do hope that one day we get more of his films released here, because all the reviews of really all of his films, especially Hanagatami, is like, people love it. I've seen images from it, but you can't find it here, unfortunately. So I hope that because House is such a popular film, that one day we'll get more of his films released here in the U.S. and around the world outside of Japan, where more people can experience it. Because, man, there's one thing about him that you can't argue, is that he has an imagination like nobody else.
Yeah.
For sure. And who wouldn't want to see more examples of that?
It's worth mentioning, too, I don't think I've said this, but Toho was not happy with how popular it was.
Really?
Supposedly, they wanted him to have success, but niche success.
Yeah.
They wanted it to be something
they didn't want people to expect them to make more of this movie.
Exactly.
More movies like this. Yeah.
Exactly. They thought it was he said that guy's name was Katao or something like that. I'm sorry, I forget now, but the writer was saying that he talked to him, and the guy was like, he ruined cinema. He's ruined it. he's like, because this is now it's too popular or something. Basically, he was angry it was too popular. The kids loved it, and then it was going to be huge, and they didn't want it to be that huge, and they didn't want to have to change everything, like what Justin was just saying. And and I thought that was interesting. And then he said, if you go and look, I forget what year it was, but there was a big Japanese cinema thing called Kinema Junpo. It was a magazine that ran, this is a few years back or something. They ran young Japanese filmmakers, your top 10 favorite movies, and House was the most at number 1.
Wow.
That people were just this inspired a whole generation of filmmakers.
Yeah, how could it not? Because
and there's so much bonkers stuff in it that even if you are inspired by certain elements, you could probably crank out certain projects and not even repeat yourself. There's so much in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know, man. Commercial guy was an auteur.
He was. Hey, he was an auteur before he was a commercial guy, and then but he just stuck to his guns, and he just kept making the kind of stuff that he wanted to make.
Yeah, the daughter, when they talked about that, the producers not liking it and stuff like that, and how the critics panned it, and how he took it, and she said he was just kind of this is what happens when newer ideas are born. Trips people up. They can't wrap their brains around it.
Yeah.
And so
then 40 some odd years later, here we are still talking about it.
Yeah, exactly. So good for that guy. He fucking nailed it.
He did.
I don't know. Robert Edwards is another YouTube essayist I watched that was he described it as art from innocence. He broke the rules and that changed them. And I thought that was really like some cool lines from his thing that's
cool.
I really dug. This movie, by the way, as obscure as it feels like it should be, when I was searching around YouTube on stuff about it, fucking PewDiePie has covered it.
Wow.
So I don't know if you don't know who PewDiePie is, then
good for you, honestly.
Yeah, good for you. Don't watch the video; it'll annoy the shit out of you. It's like him and his wife or something, and it is. I don't have a politically correct term I can use for it, but but that video alone, just them watching House, and it plays like certain little clips in the bottom, and they're just talking about it while it's going on. It's like their favorite, quote unquote, favorite horror movie. But I mean, that video has millions, like literally millions of views.
Yeah, so. I mean, this movie has definitely, like, in the last decade, become a huge cult classic, which is pretty impressive because a lot of times cult movies take like decades to, which, I mean, granted, this movie's been out for decades, but before 2010 or so, most people in America had never heard of this movie, like at all. I had not. Yeah. I had not heard about it until Criterion started doing, or Janus Film started doing those screenings, because I first heard about it when it screened in Nashville, and I think if I remember correctly, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think that the guy who created the iconic poster that's used for the Criterion, the cover on that, of the orange one with the cat, which is based on imagery from the original, campaign, the promotions for when it came out. But the guy who created that poster, I think it was Sam Smith, not the singer, different one.
Oh, I was about to say.
He created that image originally for a series of screenings, midnight screenings of that movie in Nashville, Tennessee.
Wow.
And it just became like the image that the film is known by now.
Well, I mean, I was super unfamiliar with this, and Justin, I think I mentioned it to you yesterday, of like, had no idea, but once I did finally see the image, I was like, oh, I've seen this poster.
Yeah.
Like, the marketing, I mean, we talked about it in the episode of like the novelization, the manga, trading cards, the fashion show, the music, the whole thing. It was all put out there, and it did a great job of getting you to know something about this film. And it's an iconic look, man.
Yeah.
It's hard to not love it after like everything that went into it and what the goal was and that sort of thing. I also think it's got to be like such a cool thing that if you're like the daughter who is still around and like her potential kids and stuff, that is just like, what a cool story that like, yeah, my dad took my thoughts as a child and put them on screen.
Yeah.
I just love that idea. It's a cool concept.
Very well. I think that's it for this one, guys. I think we have
we stumbled upon a classic with the roulette.
It did.
Like a
we
hardcore classic. I
Absolutely.
feel like.
Yeah, this was a good one. This is a good roulette episode. Like I said, this is the type of movie that like the roulette was created for. I wish we could do a whole series in Obayashi's films, but unfortunately, most of them you just can't get here, so we can't watch them. So it's hard for us to get any information about them or even see them. But I'm glad we were able to discuss this one. Also,
further proof that Jaws is really the greatest film of all time.
Right? Yeah,
because it inspired House.
It inspired
which
House.
Jaws changed Japanese cinema.
Yep. All right, guys. So let's talk about what we're going to be, talking about on the next episode of Cinema Shock. What two of us are going to be talking about on the next episode of Cinema Shock, because
tough life we lead.
One of them got fired. One of us got fired from the show. Turns out,
one of us was murdered.
No, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're not going into a long form series like we normally do. Just for scheduling reasons. We got the holidays coming up and schedules are weird, and people are traveling, and Todd's going to Europe for a fucking month.
To be fair, I did pitch that we did a murder storyline with Todd, but nobody was down with it.
I did not reject that idea. I think that is a lot of fun. But just to give folks a peek behind the curtain, it's my wife and I. It's our 15th wedding anniversary. It's my 40th birthday. She's spreading her grandmother's ashes. We're Christmas, New Year's. We're doing it all in this one trip to the UK. So yeah, this is kind of a big one for us.
So anyway, Todd's not going to be on the show for a while.
So I'm going to be gone for a while.
That's what we're saying. So
leave your 5-star reviews now so that we know what you really think, and we have evidence for it.
So instead of doing a long form series like we normally do after a roulette episode like this one, we are instead just going to do a few more roulette episodes just for shits and giggles. Me and Gary are just gonna have some fun and just choose some random movies that aren't part of a larger series. So as we always do, we will pick these at random, just like we picked out HAUSU, which, by the way, we have not mentioned this on this whole episode, guys, but HAUSU is our 100th episode of Cinema Shock.
Hey.
I feel like we should have made a bigger deal about that, but we didn't. But 100 episodes, that's pretty good.
We did have Doc Stinson argue with you about that.
Yeah, he's wrong.
Through me.
He is wrong. Sorry, Dr. Stinson, but HAUSU is our 100th episode.
Yay.
But I will say, this is cool that we had a 100th episode. I wish we had planned it a little bit better so that we knew that, but
ahead of time. Yeah. So, but anyway, for episode 101, we're going to be doing another roulette. So spin the wheel. Gary, you get to spin the wheel. Todd, you can't touch it because you are leaving us.
Oh, Gary get to do it twice in a row.
It sounds like what I said to my dad.
Spin that wheel, Gary.
Go.
All right, spinning it.
All right, so the fates have picked Heathers. We're watching Heathers from 1989. You guys have seen this? Well, it doesn't matter whether you've seen it before, Todd. You're not going to be here for this. Have you seen it? Have you seen Heathers, Todd?
I think I have. I'm pretty sure. I think I've seen it. I think I've seen it at least once.
Okay. Well, yeah.
I'm just going to go ahead and say this. This is embarrassing for me to say, but I don't think I've ever seen this movie.
Oh, good. Really? That's fun. That's fun. There's nothing to be ashamed of. I'm glad that you're going to get to experience it because I really like this movie and I think it's a ton of fun. So we're going to get into the story behind Heathers from 1989. You can find it streaming online. I'm sure it's pretty easy to find. That one's pretty popular these days. So join us for that episode and we'll see what we can find out about how Heathers was made.
Yay.
I'm excited. I do like some Christian Slater and his tips to be Jack Nicholson that never came to fruition.
He tries. He does. And until we're not to that part yet. Where can you guys be found on the internet?
Oh, me?
Yeah, sure. You, Gary.
I bet this is Gary Horne, all spelled out on Instagram and X. If you like wrestling, I host the This Is Pro Wrestling podcast at This Is Pro Wrestling on YouTube and at TIPW Show on Instagram. I also work with the National Wrestling Alliance, and you can access their links in their bio on Instagram at NWA.
I'm working my way through the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological order for now on my show Computer Resume podcast, available now wherever you get your podcasts and on all the socials at Computer Resume. And I'm at Mr. Todd A. Davis on Facebook, X, Instagram, Letterboxd, and D&D Beyond, as long as they behave themselves.
And you can find me at Justin_Bishop on Instagram and Letterboxd. The show is at Cinema_Shock on all those social media platforms. You can, of course, find all of our episodes as well as links to our Discord, our merch, t-shirts and such. We've got holiday seasons coming up. So, buy your friends, buy your family a Cinema Shock t-shirt and they will say, what the hell is Cinema Shock? But you can find
what is
those
a podcast
on our website at cinemashock.net. As always, please share this episode with any of your friends who you think may enjoy it in any way that you know how. And until next time,
may the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
And be excellent to each other.
Johnny eats unmarried young girls. It is the only time he can wear the keys.
No, I hate that.
Yeah, no. Yeah.